Did you know that the most radical legislature ever in California history is preparing to pass some of the most radical legislation in American history when they come back in August? Are you going to stand for that? Join us at the Take Back California Conference with John Cox and many of the good pro-life legislators and candidates. Go to californiaprolife.org and register now for Take Back California, August 14th and 15th.
Are there constructive things that you can do to help restore a culture of life? Find out next on this edition of Life Matters. Brian Johnston is the Western Director of the National Right to Life Committee. He has served in many capacities while advocating for innocent lives, as California Commissioner on Aging, as Chairman of the California Pro-Life Council, on the board of the National Legal Center for the Medically Dependent and Disabled. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters, your program on the right to life, on the culture that emanates from that idea, and on the very real battle of ideas that you're in right now. And if you don't realize you're in this battle, you're going to lose, and your loved ones, because this is truly a battle. It's not merely a metaphor. Lives will be protected, or lives will be taken, intentionally taken, depending on the ideas that are put into law. This is critically important for you to understand. We want to welcome you to life and to waking up to this real battle right now. Today's program is a real pleasure to offer to you. Back at the National Right to Life Convention this year, I had a chance to sit down with a good friend, Father Frank Pavone. Father Frank has been in the Right to Life movement for a long time, and obviously, he's a Catholic priest. Now, this program is heard throughout California on Christian stations and actually on conservative talk stations as well. But I have to tell you, there's a lot of Catholics that tune in, and that's good. And we welcome them because Catholicism has, in fact, affirmed the right to life for a very long time. It's important, though, to understand what that means. And that's why it's so important that if you're listening, or if you're listening by podcast, listen carefully, because the distinctions being made are very important. It's easy, and many people have told me that they see the right to life issue as a Catholic issue. And you know what? Nothing could be further from the truth. The fact is that, as Father Frank points out, this is not about Catholicism in any way, shape, or form. And whatever your faith is, this isn't about your faith. This is about something that transcends all of that. And if you've heard our program before and you understand what we've talked about, this battle right now for your society is a battle for the heart of Western civilization. That may seem like an overstatement. I'm sorry if it strikes you that way initially. But once you understand what Western civilization is and what it's built on, you will recognize that this is a very serious battle for the very foundational structure of those ideas that have created our society. So please listen carefully. It's a real joy to bring you Father Frank Pavone. We're at the National Right to Life Convention with an old friend, Father Frank Pavone with Priests for Life. It's good to be with you, Father.
Oh, Brian, it's always good to see you, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Oh, an honor, and you too. Father and I were talking, and we've talked about this before, and on Life Matters, we've discussed this issue. What is the right to life? What is the right to life? Well, the first thing is, when our founders signed that founding document, they asserted that statement. It had been in political philosophy for a while, but it's really a statement about the relationship between human beings and their government, and a declaration that we have rights that the government didn't even give us, rights given to us by God, but that the government has a duty to protect. So the government doesn't give you your rights, your Creator did. Beyond that, though, our founders didn't go into a lot of theology. The deepest they went into theology is to say that there are laws of nature and of nature's God. And those laws are revealed in nature. We know in the scriptures, Romans 1:20 says he revealed his invisible nature through his visible creation. So they're without excuse. All of us know deep down that the world is bigger than just us. And there are laws that govern this universe. And that's what's referred to in natural law and the laws of nature. Father, we were talking earlier about the Catholic Catechism saying exactly that.
Well, yes, and this might surprise many people. Let me frame it from my own perspective. as a Catholic priest,
Yes.
running a group called Priests for Life, going out there dealing with abortion all the time, people often presume that if they hear me talk, they're just going to hear religious doctrine or they're going to hear about abortion from a faith perspective. And then they're surprised when they hear me use exactly the arguments that you're talking about: natural law, human reason, science, what is observable. And they say, oh, I thought I was going to hear a religious talk. Now, obviously, I preach and I do give religious talks. But here's the thing for people to keep in mind. And the Catechism says this, and also the teachings of the Second Vatican Council. Those documents address abortion very explicitly. And of course, under the pontificates of blessed soon-to-be Saint Paul VI and of John Paul II, of course, and now under Pope Francis, the Church has issued many, many statements about abortion. And in all of these statements, you put all this teaching together, and you find how much, and not only on this issue, but on all issues, the Catholic Church reveres the gift of human reason. Because when we look at God, we see him as the creator of everything. That includes human nature, the laws of nature, and human reason that is capable of discerning those laws and making very solid arguments before you even reach questions of revelation. When people talk about Catholic teaching, there's two dimensions, if you will, of Catholic teaching. One are those things that God has revealed that you could not know unless God had revealed them.
Revealed truths.
But revealed truths. But then there are truths that we can arrive at by human reason. So one of the examples I often use is stealing. We read it in the Bible, thou shalt not steal. We see it on the lips of Jesus. We find it in the Catholic Catechism. But do you ever hear people say, oh, well, those Catholics teach that you can't steal, but I don't have to be Catholic, so therefore I can steal.
Right.
And it just doesn't work that way, because people realize, well, no matter what religion you are, society can't function if stealing is allowed.
That's right.
And so the basis for saying stealing is wrong is not that it's a religious teaching. It's that human reason can discern. People have a right to their possessions. You cannot take them. If you do, society falls into chaos.
Exactly.
And it's the same with the right to life.
That's exactly right. So the right to life, while it's often branded a religious issue, and obviously so many of us are people of faith, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing for people of faith to be involved in the civic process.
They have to be.
But in the civic process, we must recognize the other members of our civic community may not share our faith.
That's right.
So the reason it's important to understand what the right to life is, and that it's a predicate of the laws of nature, and of objective facts, self-evident truths, scientifically observed. Every child that's killed in an abortion, that stops a beating heart. Now,
undeniable.
So it isn't because I believe that heart is beating. If I was to call you, Father, tomorrow and say, Father, I changed my mind, I don't believe it anymore, you would rightly say this never had anything to do with what you believe. Either this is objectively a human being, and science concurs constantly and goes even deeper every day.
Right.
New scientific discoveries in terms of microbiology and the nature of the human cell itself.
Yeah.
It's revealing these truths. And so I think it's important for Christians, regardless of their denomination, to understand that they are touching something. When you're talking about God's creation, the rocks speak out. They proclaim God's creation. And even in dealing with Christians, God often, even his deepest followers, when Abram doubted, said, Abram, get out of the tent. Come outside. Look at the stars, Abram. Look at what I've created. Look at this. And in Psalm 19, that the heavens are declaring the glory of God. There's no language where that's not understood. So the laws of nature are revealed to all. And we need to understand, and Christians should be the most apt to be able to point to natural law. If you're really a Christian, you're claiming, I have a personal relationship with the maker of all things. Well, one of the reasons I think Christians are often held in disregard, well, you don't seem like it. If you know the guy that made everything, how come you aren't able to discern and explain everything, how it really works?
Exactly.
And if we get lazy, we fall back on our religious predilections. and say, well, you just have to believe it because that's my faith. That's the worst possible way to present the right to life. We should be apt to teach and quick to help them come out of the confusion in their mind. They've been taken captive in the futility of their mind to believe a word like choice. Actually, which you and I know what it really means, you have to explain to them what's being chosen.
Life Matters continues after this.
Did you know that the most radical legislature ever in California history is preparing to pass some of the most radical legislation in American history when they come back in August? Are you going to stand for that? Join us at the Take Back California Conference with John Cox and many of the good pro-life legislators and candidates. Go to californiaprolife.org and register now for Take Back California, August 14th and 15th.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters Radio. We've been talking with Father Frank Pavone, and we're going to join him again in just a moment. I want to remind you, wherever you're listening to Life Matters on the radio, you can tune back to this station next week. We're a weekly program. But if you've missed something, you can go to lifematters.life. I have friends of mine, and they're very complimentary. They have said, I really like that program. I caught that. I never really had thought of it that way. Could you tell me again about whatever the topic was? And that's very kind of them. And I want you to know that's also the reason we have a podcast available, and it's got some notes with it. But the podcast is there for you to think more deeply about this. And I know you don't have time when you're driving to take notes. Sometimes I hear things I want to write down. But do go to the podcast at lifematters.life. And I think this program with Father Frank is one of those programs. You have to understand, as passionate as you are about your faith, this issue, in many ways, has really nothing to do with your personal faith. The issue of protecting vulnerable human lives is a principle of Western civilization. That's what's at stake in this battle. So we're going to pick up now with Father Frank at our interview at the National Right to Life Convention.
You know, this is so important, and it brings up a number of thoughts, and you and I have observed these dynamics in the movement. We both remember, of course, Bernard Nathanson. And here we have a co-founder of the whole abortion movement, abortion industry. Now, this man purposely, he and his friends, as he wrote about after his conversion, he and his friends deliberately framed the abortion issue in opposition to abortion as a Catholic issue. Because then they felt they could relativize it. And the abortion people today do the same thing. So, if this is just a religious issue, we have freedom of religion, so we can dismiss it. And they just dismiss it, just like they... No, here's the problem with doing that, like the example I made about stealing. The abortion people have run out of arguments. You know, you and I know this, whether it's from science or it's from psychology, sociology, philosophy, no matter what branch of human knowledge you apply to the abortion issue, the abortion industry has run out of arguments. It's all contradicted. The promises they made at the time of Roe v. Wade, it'll decrease poverty, it'll decrease child abuse, it'll help women. Nothing of this has happened. Those problems have gotten worse. And so when you try to argue with the abortion people in any of these fields of knowledge, because they've run out of arguments, what they will try to do is they will say, you know how they often say, abortion is the decision between a woman and her doctor. And now more and more they say, it's between a woman and her doctor and her God. Now, they're trying to make themselves religious. Yeah. And we have abortionists who are saying, I do abortions not despite my faith, but because of my faith. Okay, they're hijacking faith. Here's what they're doing. They're appealing to God. They're appealing to religious faith as a substitute for all the other arguments.
That's right.
When we appeal to religious faith, it is not as a substitute for the other arguments. It is as the foundation of the other arguments. Just like you're saying, God created science, created nature, created the laws of nature. And so we have to be, as you say, the first to affirm the natural realities of science, logic, what is observable, and what we can come to conclusions about. And that's where, when people talk about, there should be a separation between church and state. That whole debate is often missing a third element of the equation. Yes, there is church, and it has its role. Yes, there is the state, it has its role. But the third element of the equation is morality. And morality applies both to church and
That's
state.
right.
You may remember some of the court cases back, I think it was in the 19th century, where there were church services in the South where people were doing snake handling.
Oh, yeah.
And the law stepped in and said, well, listen, you people might believe this as part of your religion.
I think it's still done in some places.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
And the question at issue before the courts was, can the law prevent doing this for the sake of protecting people from snake bites and getting sick and dying? Even though it's a religious belief, can you do that? And the bottom line was there were a number of decisions that said, well, yes, of course the law can protect those worshipers from the danger of the snake bites because, these people can believe whatever they want. We're not legislating what they're going to believe. But in practice,
right,
church, state, and morality, both the church and the state have a duty to the health and well-being of those people.
Yes.
So just as we do not base our opposition to abortion primarily on religious teaching, it's the same reason why the pro-abortion people cannot base their acceptance of abortion primarily on religious teaching. Because otherwise, that's what you end up getting. You end up getting a position where their belief is just as good as ours.
That's right. They'll invoke Wicca.
Yeah.
They'll invoke basically many forms of animism. In fact, there are tribes in Africa still that kill their children. I just saw a documentary on that.
It's scary, isn't it?
It's very scary.
Yeah.
So if we make this about religion, people will simply say, I will invoke
this is my religion.
And you have no right to dictate your religion to me. There's a certain point they're correct. The advantage we have is, as Scripture said, and as our founder said, well, God, the God of all things, has revealed himself in all things.
In creation. That's right. Exactly.
And so we have an obligation, I believe, if we're going to be conscientious as Christians and conscientious as pro-lifers, to be able to point out in nature, in science, why it's objectively true, not religiously true.
Objectively
It's objectively true,
That's right.
a self-evident truth.
Yeah.
That's what our founders gave us, that ability to live in a nation built on those truths, and that's what's at stake now.
Because if we don't have that, dialogue becomes impossible. Okay, because if you're just, if you got a pipeline to God, that you say, this is my religious belief, okay,
right.
and you don't need any arguments to justify it, all you have to do is say, this is what I believe. And if I have a pipeline to God and say, well, hey, this is what I believe, and if that's the only forum in which you can come to a conclusion about something like abortion, here's what happens in the political and the public debate arena: debate stops.
Exactly.
And if debate stops, and if dialogue stops, and if there's no longer a common basis for exchanging ideas and reasoning things through, then the political process, the democratic process, breaks down. Mm-hmm. And you're left with nothing but fighting.
That's right.
And you're left with nothing but name-calling and screaming and, God forbid, violence, This is why, one other thought on this, and it's a logical conclusion of what you're saying, and we've talked about this before. When people say to me, oh, look at these politicians, these Catholic politicians that are supporting abortion. Mm-hmm. We've got to speak out against them because they're violating their Catholic faith. You know what my approach is and the approach of Priests for Life? Of course they're violating their Catholic faith, but that's not what we lead with. That's not the primary argument I make. Because then what am I saying about the Protestant lawmakers or the Jewish lawmakers or the atheist lawmakers? Is it okay for them to support abortion? I say, look, it's not just that they're violating their Catholic faith. The Christians in Congress who are voting pro-abortion are violating their Christian faith, but it's even more deep than that. Any politician who's for abortion is violating what it means to be a public servant.
That's right.
And I always say we have to elect public servants who know the difference between serving the public and killing the public. If you're a right,
that's right.
If you're a public servant, listen. Don't even tell me what your religion is.
That's right.
Are you a public servant? Are you going to serve the public or not? Are you going to protect life or not?
That's right.
And not only are they violating the meaning of public service and the meaning of America and the purpose of government, they are violating the meaning of being human.
Right.
We start there.
That's right.
And
this is a civil right issue.
Yes, every one of those politicians.
Human right.
I don't care what they claim to believe. They are all under an obligation to protect that human right.
That's right.
Which, like you said, the government is there to protect, not to give or take away or edit or delete or dilute. I was privileged to preach in the halls of Congress on the day that they voted on Obamacare in the House of Representatives back in 2010. If you remember, they called for that vote on a Sunday.
Yes.
On a Sunday afternoon.
I was in the gallery.
Were you there?
Yes.
Were you there? They had the prayer service in the statuary hall, right? And so the members of Congress who are church-going Christians, and there's a lot of them,
yes,
they said, we're going to have church. We're gonna have a service. And so at that time, Michelle Bachmann called me up. She said, hey, can you come down to D.C. and preach? We're going to have a number of preachers. I said, I'm there. So I went. And this is the point I made to them. I said, you are called in Scripture, public servants are called ministers of God. So it's not just us who are in the clergy who are ministers of God. They are too. I said, because your role is to serve the people, not to rule over them, not to lord it over them, to serve them. And serving them means you recognize that, hey, I can't tamper with your human rights.
Yes.
They're not mine to play around with. You don't get them from me, and I can't take them away from you. They're given to you by God, and I am in a servant role, a servant not only of the God of this country, I'm a servant to you because your rights are sacred. They're beyond my authority to tamper with.
That's right.
This is what our fight is about.
That's right. Father Frank, always a pleasure.
Oh, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share these important reflections.
Life Matters continues after this.
Did you know that the most radical legislature ever in California history is preparing to pass some of the most radical legislation in American history when they come back in August? Are you going to stand for that? Join us at the Take Back California Conference with John Cox and many of the good pro-life legislators and candidates. Go to californiaprolife.org and register now for Take Back California, August 14th and 15th.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Well, as you can tell, this is a very important topic, and each week on Life Matters, we delve deeply into very important foundational topics that emanate from the concept of a right to life. And you'd be surprised how many there are and how foundational this idea is that every life has intrinsic value and worth, and that civilization's role, and particularly government's role, is to protect the lives of the innocent that are governed by that government. That's the reason governments are established among men, is what the founders of this nation said. This is an important topic, and I had a good friend that told me they don't believe in the laws of nature or natural law. I was stunned. And then I realized why she said that. She did not understand. In fact, she actually had been subjected to what our culture teaches as law regarding nature. It's the opposite. And it's a phrase all of you have heard. It's called the law of natural selection. But that's exactly the opposite of what our founders said. It's the opposite of what civilization has taught. And that is, in fact, the law of the jungle, where only the strong survive, only the strong adapt, only those who can kill will be able to resist being killed, and therefore it's the law of the jungle. This is the opposite of what your founders stated, what all, historically speaking, wise philosophers have stated, starting from Aristotle through the Christian, Greek, and Roman tradition, on through Western civilization, that there's a higher law that you can see in nature. That's what our founders said, and that's what you need to understand, so be ready in this battle of ideas. We're not talking about the law of the jungle here or natural selection. That's what this confused culture has been teaching. What you need to know is this, is that in fact, the appeal to the king by our founders was actually asserting that he himself was not a just king because he was not following higher law. That really the divine right of kings, if you think about it for just a moment, the divine right of kings is an appeal to the law of the jungle. Hey, I'm now king. I'm in charge. God put me here, so there. If you challenge my authority, I'm going to have to challenge you and put you down. That is not what the laws of nature and nature's God have established as just government. And our founders talked about the long string of abuses and usurpation by a king who didn't understand his true role in a just government. Our founders were appealing to the laws of nature and of nature's God. They were not appealing to the law, the so-called law of natural selection. Sadly, most Americans are confused about these ideas. You're in a battle of ideas. If the wrong ideas are in your head, you're going to lose, and your opponents are going to treat you as irrelevant. So the right to life is so critically important, and it's so critically important that you understand it and be ready to defend it, to give an answer as to why this is so important. Life Matters is here to serve you. We'd like you to have the tools at your hand. Go to nrlc.org, wherever you are in the nation, and you can get the tools offered by the National Right to Life Committee. It's a federation of right to life organizations in every state, organizations that are dedicated to this basic principle of the right to life. There are people in every one of these organizations, yes, from different faiths, yes, that reflect the cultures in their community, but they're in agreement on this, the most fundamental, essential right. So go to nrlc.org. It's the Federation of Right to Life, pro-life affiliates across our nation. See what you can do on any federal issue. You'll get up-to-date information as those things are coming. We're seeing a lot of changes in our nation right now. Be ready. Also on the state level, again, we're heard here in California on various stations in California. And in our podcast, many of our subscribers are still in California, although we have them across the nation and in other countries. But most importantly, if you're in California, our fight is a tough one. So please do join us at CaliforniaProLife.org. That's CaliforniaProLife.org. We'll give you information and tools to be effective in your community. And in California, we aim to take California back for life. We're not walking away. We want the values that this nation and this state were founded on. Do you know that the right to life explicitly appears in the California Constitution, in the First Amendment of the California Constitution? It's a foundational premise of society, so I'm glad that our state and our nation, these are jurisdictions that at their founding asserted the right to life. So important that you understand it and what you can do about it. So go to CaliforniaProLife.org. Thank you for listening to Life Matters. We deeply appreciate the support you can give us. Again, go to CaliforniaProLife.org, go to LifeMatters.life, and on the really big issues, go to NRLC.org. That's the National Right to Life Committee. And you can also look up your state affiliate there. Thanks for listening to Life Matters.
To follow Life Matters on all social media and to subscribe to the Life Matters podcast, go to lifematters.life, where you will find everything you need to know to share life, culture, and the battle of ideas with everyone you care about. Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life.
Did you know that the most radical legislature ever in California history is preparing to pass some of the most radical legislation in American history when they come back in August? Are you going to stand for that? Join us at the Take Back California Conference with John Cox and many of the good pro-life legislators and candidates. Go to CaliforniaProLife.org and register now for Take Back California, August 14th and 15th.